Okay, I'm live, and we will talk about motherboards on this stream because I've been getting a couple of comments, people asking about motherboard layouts for particularly ASUS motherboards because those are not, they don't give away their block diagram in the user manual, which is absurd, but and very anti-consumer. But you can still figure out how it's connected if you understand how the chipset works. So we'll probably look at some of those later on in the stream, and then depending on how many viewers are participating in the chat, we'll go pretty deep on the motherboards. Otherwise, what I'll probably do is I'll start playing Wolong Fallen Dynasty again, because I am trying to complete that game here in the next couple of days. So I just thought I would just do Genshin Impact while the viewers join the stream, and then we can talk about motherboards, CPUs, whatever. So what I'll do is, like I always do at the beginning of the streams, I'll just be doing my Genshin Impact dailies. So we're just gonna get these out of the way. I have worked extensively today on benchmarking a lot of games. Hey Joey, if you just tuned in, I did mention earlier, I will be talking about motherboards. So we'll do some block diagram. We'll do some block diagram breakdowns for ASUS motherboards, because I've been getting a couple of comments on the ASUS ProArt Creator, and then I know you had messaged me about the Z790 ASUS board, so we can dig into that and do a breakdown for the block diagram for the platform here in a little bit. I'm just gonna let more viewers join in first, so they don't miss anything on the technical side while I just do my Genshin Impact dailies. Hey, Mr. Tennis, I'm doing good. I was really busy today working on benchmarking because I am gonna be doing a video, my own video for the 7950 X3D gaming benchmarks, and I will look at productivity in another video. But I spent most of this afternoon, probably the entire afternoon today, benchmarking games across 3 PC builds, and I tried to parallelize the work as much as possible in terms of being able to run benchmarks on my 7950 X3D system, on the 13900K system, and the 7950X system as much as possible. However, I was constrained because Steam only lets you run a game from a single PC. So that kind of bottlenecked my speed at which I could get the work done. But I was able to work around that by using Epic Games Launcher for some of the benchmarks. And then one of the games in particular, I won't reveal the game yet. You'll have to watch the actual video to find out. But that one has a separate benchmark that's completely separate from the game, so you don't need Steam or any kind of launcher to access it. So that's why I like using that one. But I stayed away from synthetic benchmarks, and I stayed away from any productivity benchmarks. I did strictly gaming, because the whole story behind, like, the 3D Vcache, like, the whole claim to fame for the Vcache is in the gaming space, not so much the productivity space. But because the 7950X 3D, and I guess by the same token the 7900X 3D, they feature the second CCD without Vcache, that gives them a higher core count than a standard gaming CPU. So they would be better suited for, mixed workload environments. Typically productivity, video rendering, content creation, that sort of thing. Blender, DaVinci Resolve. Those are the sort of things that I do want to look at with this X3D CPU in a future video. Because, what if somebody buys one of these for a high-end system that they're going to use as a workstation, a prosumer desktop, and they're not necessarily going to play games that much, but they still want to be able to play games when they can. You know, that like, basically like my use case, these 3D Vcache Ryzen 9 CPUs actually make sense for somebody like me. But they also make sense for somebody who does live streaming as like a career. Like for instance, people that are on Twitch. I do kind of think that these 3D Vcache CPUs are probably the best ones for that work environment, like that actual use case. More so than the standard 7950X and Intel's high-end offerings. Because, well, as we already know, but you know, my results today kind of validated what I already expected. The energy efficiency on those 3D Vcache CPUs is basically the chart topper. Like no other CPU can match the 7950X 3D in efficiency while giving similar performance numbers. Crater is a great board. You get a lot for the money. Yeah, we'll look at that one here in a little bit. Looking forward to seeing them. Okay, yeah. So that I haven't filmed the video yet. Today all I did was I did all the benchmarking. I put all the data across the 3 PCs into, you know, a unified Excel file, and then I have the PowerPoint deck done to present it. I just need time to film it. So I need to do that piece, and then I'll be able to upload it. So that video should go live tomorrow. And then I'll probably work on the productivity one sometime throughout the week. You've been benchmarking all day too. Your wife's not happy. I'm about to see if I can get the 7800 DDR5 to boot, and I'll call it a day. Oh. Yeah, I mean, as long as it's like two sticks of RAM and it's 16 gig single rank DIMMs, it'll probably work. I don't know if it's 100% stable though. Wait a minute, did I not do this? Oh no, this is a different one. Is it worth it for AMD to instead put 2 CCD with 3? I personally don't think so. I don't think they need to do that. If they do that, see, I don't think that makes sense. To put 2... I mean, practicality, yes, it does make sense, but in the real world, it doesn't really make sense. Because games don't need 16 cores, let alone 32 threads. And when you have a high core count CPU, so 16 core 32 thread, or even 12 core 24 thread, assuming it's like they all have simultaneous multi-threading, they're all the same type of core, so there's no big little core, there's no mix of cores, they're all the same type, and you have 12 of them or 16 of them. When you have that many cores, the use case, the target buyer for in the real world for those type of CPUs should be somebody who is using those CPUs for productivity purposes, not just gaming. I think like the media has done a really bad job portraying or trying to like label high core count CPUs for gaming. I think what's interesting is the 3D Vcache 5800X 3D really shook up the market last year because it showed that you can make a lower core count CPU perform better than the flagship CPUs. When I say flagship CPUs, I'm talking about the expensive CPUs. So think 5950X, 5900X, and then, you know, now the 7000 series are here. And then now the 13th gen with the i9s. Those are really high core count CPUs, which, in my mind, those CPUs, anything with a 9, so like a Ryzen 9, an Intel Core i9, those CPUs don't make much sense at all for just gaming. And they cost a lot of money, and they don't provide that much more when you look at it compared to a lower priced, lower core count CPU that can give you the same exact experience at the end of the day. So, the thing with the V-cache on an 8-core, or even like a 6-core, theoretically, if something like that could exist, that's really all you need for a gaming CPU. And what makes the 5800X 3D so good is it shows that you can get top-tier gaming performance with a lower core count CPU, while not having to pay as much money as what you typically would for, you know, like a really high core count CPU. So that's why everybody's saying wait for the 7800X 3D. So, without spoiling too much of my video, I came to that realization, like after benchmarking for like 2 hours or 3 hours. I kind of figured out, you know, okay, these high core count CPUs aren't really, like, they shouldn't really be marketed for gaming. I think the media does a really bad job doing that. So like the big YouTube channels, like showing off, you know, like gaming performance for an i9 13900K or a 7950X or 7950X 3D, like these super high core count CPUs, they really don't make much sense for gaming. I mean, yeah, obviously you can play games on them, but why does somebody need to spend that much money for a CPU to play games? Realistically, they don't. They don't, and that's why, you know, the 5800X 3D makes the most sense. The 7800X 3D is probably going to make even more sense. So that's kind of the way I see it. Because you still have, you know, 16 threads on a single CCD. It's amazing what AMD is doing with the efficiency. Yeah, the efficiency is the thing, but what's cool is the fact that the 5800X3 wasn't that much lower power than a standard 5800X. But I think the 7800X3 is going to be like way more efficient than a standard 7700X. Because the thing that I've also noticed is that people will build gaming PCs. They'll spend, you know, $500 or more on a CPU, which I think is just way too much money for a gaming CPU. And then they'll go and they'll disable stuff. Like, the thing is, when people buy a high core count CPU, so a dual CCD CPU, or a CPU that has a bunch of E-cores, they should not be disabling those features of the processor. I think that's a really bad use of the money. Like, I really think people who are buying a 13900K or a 7950X 3D, and then they go and they turn off like one of the CCDs, or they go and turn off all the E-cores, that's really a bad move. Because if they were going to build a gaming CPU, they should have either just got a 5800X 3D, or they should just wait for like a month and a week, or basically a month now, for the 7800X 3D. Or if they want to buy an Intel CPU, they should get like a 13700K, or even like a 13600K. But the reason why I like the 13700K is because that one gives you the full 8 performance cores. But even then, it feels so bad to me, because those 8 E-cores are really not needed for gaming. So it's just kind of weird. Like, it's almost like the 12700K was actually a more optimal choice for a gaming CPU, because it only had 4 E-cores, so it wasn't really wasting money, you know, in terms of per core. So I don't know. I just think that gaming PCs don't really stand to benefit from having dual CCDs and E-cores in them. But what's strange, the only caveat with that statement is, in the case of the AMD dual CCD, like, occasionally there will be those games that prefer higher frequency, so they would actually run better on the non-Vcache CCD. But the thing is, that's so rare to encounter those type of games that it's one of those things where it's like, you know, even if you have the dual CCD, you shouldn't be buying the dual CCD for gaming, and you shouldn't be buying a dual CCD with Vcache and then turning off like half of the cores. That seems really bad. It's almost as dumb as like buying a 13900K and then turning off all 16 E-cores. That to me is like a very, very stupid move. Like, why waste that much money and then turn off half the processor or like half the core count? You know, when you could have just bought like a cheaper i7 and did the same thing, but then you didn't waste that much money. So I don't know. Like that whole idea of disabling cores for better gaming performance just sounds really, really dumb. Like people shouldn't buy these high core count CPUs for gaming if they're gonna do something dumb like that. That's the way I see it. If you were gaming on the E-cores only, what would that be equivalent to? That would be like a Kaby Lake or like a Skylake. So that would be like a 6700K from like 2015. So really, really not great by today's standards. You'd be basically horribly CPU bound if you're gaming on E-cores. Okay, it booted easy and the whole system is overclocked. Hey, why is my oh, there it is. Joshua McGillis just subbed to the channel. Thanks for the sub. Feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have any questions about like PC build advice, that sort of thing. But yeah, like the problem with, well, we'll see. And I just thought of something. You know what? There's something that's missing from my review content. I need to add the operating system. I don't have the operating system in the test system info, so I need to put that in real quick. So my review, which will be on the channel tomorrow, will have all the testing will have been done. I can't speak apparently. Will have been done using Windows 10. All of the test results that you will see from me tomorrow are using Windows 10, not Windows 11, Windows 10, because the vast majority of people that play games are still on Windows 10, myself included. All three of the computers that I tested are all using Windows 10. So it's the latest version of Windows 10, all the latest patches, the latest drivers, etc. All that stuff is installed. So, but I do need to point that out in my test setup info. I guess I'll put it at the top. Windows 10. Actually, what's the version of Windows 10 that I'm running? Windows 10 Pro. So I'm running Windows 10 Pro version 22.2H. So 22 second half. 2022 second half. So I guess that's the latest one, because that's what I tested everything on. So we're not about to change that right now. Why does AMD push so much marketing 7950X for gamers to buy? They didn't actually do that though. They didn't push the 7950X as the gaming champion. If you actually go back and look at their presentations, it's always the productivity is what they're pushing that CPU for. I mean, they'll put it in like gaming benchmarks because they know that that's what the public is always looking at. But to be fair, it's not like Intel doesn't do that either. They both do the same thing. But the thing is, both of them, what you'll notice is that every time you look at... So first of all, so to go back to that, they don't just market the 750X as a gaming CPU. When you look at the official AMD PowerPoint slides, they have gaming stuff for those type of processors, but they also have the productivity stuff for those processors. Now, when it comes to the 8-core Ryzen 7, like the 7700X, for example, and soon the 7800X 3D, you will only see them show gaming benchmarks. Don't expect AMD to be showing DaVinci Resolve, Adobe Premiere, Blender, all this stuff. They're not going to show the productivity stuff for the 7800X3D because they understand that the target audience, the target buyer for a 7800X3D is the gaming market. That's suited for gaming, so that's where all the benchmarks for gaming are going to go. So hold on, I think I'm done. Oh, I want to do I want to burn up this stamina or resin, whatever this is, by doing some hold on, let me see what I need. Who do I need to like collect material for? And then we'll talk about motherboards after this. And then if we get done early on the motherboard, then I'll start like streaming Wolong Fallen Dynasty. But I noticed yesterday a lot of people weren't really interested in watching the Wolong Fallen Dynasty content. So, I mean, there were some people, but I feel like the stream, people get more value out of these live streams from the technical content. So that's probably what we're gonna focus on. Who is still like level 70 out of these people? So she's level 70. That's gonna be too many fights. She actually can level up. He is not gonna level up anytime soon. That's gonna be a waste of time fighting that thing. She is gonna be the same boat. This guy, I don't use him anymore. This guy, no. No. I don't know who to spend the resin on. Like, who do I spend the resin on? Kaya? You know what? I guess we'll fight the Frost one. We'll fight the Cryo one. Because it's easy. I just need to fight this thing twice, and then we'll be done with this. But yeah, obviously they're gonna put gaming benchmarks on these big core count CPUs because they already know like all the reviewers do it, so they might as well have something to show as some kind of frame of reference. Is Chi-Chi even gonna be useful in this fight? I guess we'll find out. That didn't even work. Uh-oh. There, now it worked. Alright, let's punch this flower. Oh, it survived? This will be useful. Well, we'll see. I'm gonna need a lot of these frost things. So, but anyway, so we're gonna look at ASUS motherboards here in a little bit. For those that are curious, we're gonna look at some block, or I'm gonna have to draw out some block diagrams because ASUS, unlike the other motherboard manufacturers, ASUS is the only one that does not publicly show their block diagrams. So it's very anti-consumer. That's why over the years I've kind of stayed away from ASUS. Whereas I used to have a lot of ASUS motherboards, but since the last generation, you know, I'm actually fully Gigabyte now for some reason. It's kind of weird how that played out. I didn't mean to do that, it's just that's what I was able to get on release day. But Gigabyte's pretty solid. Like, they've been pretty good right now, like with these, well, at least the Master, the X670E. I had to work with them to fix, there was a problem with AverMedia Live Gamer capture cards not waking up from sleep, so that's been fixed, although they haven't fixed the Thunderbolt one. And that's a real pain. But at least the Thunderbolt one, you can unplug it and plug it back in, and that fixes the issue. But it's kind of a workaround. It's not an actual fix. It's a workaround. There has to be a trade-off somewhere on thread count and frequency for gaming CPUs. Well, I think right now it's 8 cores. 8 cores is like where you want to be for a gaming CPU. I know this because when I benchmark a bunch of applications, I'm watching Task Manager on the other monitor, and I can see in Task Manager how many cores are actually being used while benchmarking the game. That's how I know. So it's like realistically, you don't need more than an 8-core CPU. Assuming the 8 cores all also have simultaneous multi-threading, meaning you end up having a 16-thread CPU, which is exactly what the 7800X3D is, and the 5800X3D. So the few games that I don't have though, that one of the games that I used to play, but I don't play it anymore, I probably should have benchmarked it, but I might do a separate video on it as its own content piece, is Star Citizen. So I don't play Star Citizen anymore, but Star Citizen, from what I know, the best CPU for Star Citizen, at least from what was understood before the 7000, the 7950X3D, and the other one, was the 5800X3D. The 5800X3D was, or might still be, the best CPU for Star Citizen. Now, I don't know if that's changed. I haven't seen any like videos showing Star Citizen on a 7900X3 or 7950X3D, but I mean, I'll probably have to be able to look into that myself, because I think I still have Star Citizen, and I think I can still like fire that game up and see what it runs like with these newer CPUs. But Microsoft Flight Simulator is another one. I don't have Microsoft Flight Simulator, but I think, isn't that one of the games that benefits from Vcache a lot? I know Star Citizen benefits from it an enormous amount. To the point where it's like, in the Star Citizen community, like, that became like the inside thing, you know, like that was the claim to fame for the X3D last year. Oh, she doesn't have enough, the problem with her is she doesn't form enough. Hold on, I don't want to break that thing yet, although might have to. There we go. Oh, I don't have my ult up. This is bad. Well, that guy did a lot of damage, so that worked out. This isn't gonna do anything because it's not a thing. Alright, now he's dead. ASUS X399 Prime Threadripper board had a bug that would cut the CPU fans off. Really? Man, these bugs with fans not working, I've never run into these weird problems. So like, I don't know how these motherboards have these problems. You know, it could also be the type of fan that you're using. Sometimes, like, if it's a DC fan or a PWM fan, maybe the bug only affects like a certain type of fan. Most of my case fans typically are DC fans, so the 3-pin, not the 4-pin. But the Torrent case has PWM fans, but I think the other cases that I'm using are using DC. DC tends to have less problems. I don't know, like, I've never had these problems with fans not working due to some BIOS bug because I've always used DC fans, and the DC fans, they just vary the voltage. They don't mess with the duty cycle. Okay, so I think we're done. Okay, let's talk about motherboards. I'll just log out. Let me go to Paint first. Alright, then we'll get out of Genshin. And then we're gonna look at the ASUS Creator. And then we'll look at like a Z790 one, and then we'll look at maybe some other ones that people have questions about. Alright, I gotta move the chat over here. I should also bring up the product page. I don't know if I mentioned this one on a previous live stream. I might have done it, but I don't remember. Okay. Okay, here is the motherboard. The ProArt X670E Creator Wi-Fi. It won Good Design Award from whatever that logo indicates. So this is the one that is a good choice. Max Paint. What's wrong with Max Paint? Okay, so let's look at the tech specs here, because in order for me to do the block diagram, I have to understand like what actually goes where. Okay, so you get four DIMMs, up to 128 gigabytes. Now, I will mention, just because it says 128 gigabytes of memory max doesn't mean that that's the full limit of how much RAM you can put on this motherboard. Because I remember when Threadripper, so X399, had the same marketing, so 128 gigs across 8 DIMMs. But later on, DDR4 got the higher density DIMMs, so you could actually run 256 gigabytes of memory on a Threadripper X399 motherboard. So I just wanted to point that out. So that means that someday the max on this number will go up, even though it's the same motherboard. So it just needs a BIOS update. It sounds really weird, because that's like saying I'm going to download more RAM from the internet. But essentially, we already know like Corsair has those higher dense DIMMs that have been tested on the Intel Z790 motherboards. So that's eventually going to roll over to the other motherboards. So like X670, maybe Z690. We'll be getting support for those at some point in the future. So just like with the Threadripper stuff. So that's something to mention. So if you guys are going to run a lot of memory. Now, having said that, though, that really makes sense for those who want to run a lot of RAM. And I think what that will do for the Zen 4 CPUs in particular is that will allow running, 96 gigabytes of RAM across 2 DIMMs. Which, as we know right now, running 4 DIMMs on Zen 4 is not ideal. And then when it comes to Intel, it's not ideal either, because if you run it on Intel, although I haven't tested this yet, you can't really go that much faster when you have 4 dual rank DIMMs. I think you can probably run 6,000 on Intel across all 4 DIMMs, 128 gigs maxed. But I don't know. Like, I haven't been able to test that. But I will probably test in a future video 128 gigs on Intel and see, like, is 5600 stable, for instance. Then maybe try to go up to 6,000, see if that works. The problem for me is I don't actually have DIMMs that are dual rank that are rated beyond 5600 megahertz. So if I were to try to run it at 6,000 or above, technically that's an overclock. So if I'm not able to get my RAM 128 gigs stable, I won't be able to tell if it's the RAM or if it's the CPU, because my RAM is not rated for 6400 or 6000 even. So that's why I'm most likely going to test 5600 and see if I can do 128 gigs at 5600 on Intel, because with AMD The highest I could do 128 gigs on, as my video showed on YouTube, it was like 5200 megahertz, which isn't terrible, because you can still tune the timings, provided you have Hynix DIMMs. But it'll be interesting to see what Intel can do, because I know Intel can go higher in general on the memory, because Raptor Lake is a second generation DDR5 controller versus the first generation on Zen 4. So again, we are comparing apples and oranges here, but I do want to try to see like what I can actually do, like how far can I get 128 gigs to run at on Intel. So that will be a future video on the channel. But anyway, so let's look at, so you get 4 DIMMs. It says official speed is 5200. Anything beyond 5200 on the ProArt Creator is considered an overclock, meaning it is not guaranteed on this motherboard. So people need to understand that, because I think oftentimes people will go and they'll try to, you know, like run 6000 for instance, on a motherboard, and then wonder why it randomly crashes games, or it randomly blue screens, or it doesn't wake up from sleep correctly. All those things are due to the RAM being unstable. It's technically considered an unstable overclock. It doesn't matter if the RAM is rated for that speed. Meaning if you bought RAM that says 6000 megahertz on the box, just because it says it'll run 6000 out of the box doesn't mean that when you go and put it in a motherboard like this, it's not guaranteed. So it's not guaranteed to run at 6000 on a ProArt Creator, even though the RAM is 6000 megahertz RAM. So people need to understand that, because I think there's a lot of like misunderstanding in the public when it comes to overclocked RAM, because XMP is an overclock. Expo is an overclock. It's literally in the name. Extended profiles for overclocking. So meaning it's not guaranteed. It's weird, because you can't go and like, I don't know, I think Expo and XMP is kind of a nightmare, or it can be a nightmare for memory manufacturers like G-Skill, Corsair, etc., Kingston, because if someone can't get their 6000 megahertz RAM to run stable on their shiny new ProArt Creator, they try to do an RMA with G-Skill or Corsair thinking their RAM is defective, when in reality, it's because their AMD CPU can't handle it on that motherboard, or some combination of the 2 or 3 things isn't working, because it's all not guaranteed, because it's all considered an overclock. So anyway, let's see, graphics, it has 1 HDMI port, supports 4K 60, 2 USB 4, USB-C. This means 40 gig USB-C, which means this motherboard, the ProArt Creator, has the Intel Thunderbolt 4 controller integrated into this motherboard. Supports max 8K. What is that? Oh, so you can do 8K 60. You can do 8K 60 on both of those USB 4 as a video out. Output at USB 4 EC1 and EC2 each requires a USB-C to DisplayPort adapter cable. VGA resolution support depends on processor graphics card. Okay. But I think this motherboard has DisplayPort input, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. And then for some reason they repeat all these things again. Why is this like copy pasted twice? They literally copy pasted this twice. This and this are the exact same thing. Good job, ASUS. Okay, AMD Ryzen 7000 series processors. 2 PCI 5.0 X16. One is, the top one is X16. The bottom one is X8. So when you run something in that second one, that means the top one will run at X8. Well, so we'll draw that out in the block diagram. One PCI 4.0 X16 supports X2 mode. So this is good for like a 10 gigabit PCIe expansion card, for instance, whenever those things decide to show up. And then PCIe 16_3 shares bandwidth with M.2_3 slot. Okay. Total supports 4 M.2 slots and 4 SATA. Okay, Ryzen. So these two are to the CPU. These two go to the chipset. And then this guy is sharing lanes with this guy. Okay, so I think I have enough info now to draw this out. And then it has a 10 gigabit Ethernet. Okay. And it has Wi-Fi 6E. It doesn't say what module, so I'm going to assume it's AMD Wi-Fi. There it is, right there. Intel JHL 8540 USB 4 controller. So I said it before I even saw it, but it's there. Okay, and then they got all this USB stuff. So let's go ahead and draw this thing out now. I assume this is going to connect to the CPU, but they might have done it like ASRock and put it on the chipset. So, then there's no way for me to know 100% because obviously I'm guessing because ASUS doesn't actually show the block diagram. So let's draw this out. Let's derive the motherboard, as I call it. At least they should give us a picture. They should give us a picture. Okay, here, this is what I wanted to see. At least they show us what is shared right here and what is shared up here. So that's good to know. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. So this thing is X2. But this thing can still run. This can still run when this is plugged in. That's actually really good. It's not terrible. At least it doesn't turn it off. So this has priority. The M.2 has priority. But when you plug in something down here, it will steal 2 lanes from this guy. But it will still run the M.2 drive. It just cuts the bandwidth in half. Okay. Interesting. AMD completely do away with the transitional generation chips like AM2, 3, and there being no AM4 Plus stuff. I guess the thing is, like, AM4 has been around for so long that they don't really need an AM4 Plus. AM3 was like 2009. AM3 Plus was 2011. So that's like a 2-year apart difference. Wait, there is a block diagram? You said the generic block diagram? Well, anyway, let's draw this thing. Let's go back to Paint. Okay, so first we've got the CPU block. Then we have the chipset. Well, there's actually going to be 2 of them. There's going to be 2 B650 chips in this thing. You have a primary and a secondary. So what... oh, that? Yeah, that I already know. Okay. But that could come in useful. So, for Intel, when we talk about Intel. We'll do this one first, and then we'll do the Intel one next. So, this up here is LGA 1718 AM5. That's the CPU. This down here is B650, also called Promontory 21. That is the code name. B650 Prom 21. These together, like I said in a previous video, these 2 together 2 B650s equals X670. These are wired via daisy chain. Daisy chain just means that they're tied together on the uplink. So this is going to be 4 lanes of Gen 4. Again here, 4 lanes of Gen 4. Now what is weird about this is the connection here. The interface on the CPU is capable of Gen 5. However, the B650 side can only do Gen 4. So when they talk to each other, they have to auto-negotiate to the lowest common denominator, which means they can only run at Gen 4 speed between the chipset and the CPU. Now, what I expect to happen with Zen 5, this is what I expect to see when Zen 5 launches next year. So when Zen 5 comes out, so this is kind of like a sneak peek for those watching. You guys are hearing it here first. Exclusive info. Well, it's not really exclusive info because I don't actually know. Like, no one's actually told me 100% this is going to happen. But what I expect to see next year when Zen 5 launches is they will launch a new B750 and X770 chipset. They'll launch a new motherboard. But the thing is, remember, we do not have to buy that motherboard because we're going to have a BIOS update that can allow, you know, anyone who's on X670 and B650 to throw in Zen 5, drop in socket upgrade just like that. However, what I expect is that the new motherboards that come out next year will have Gen 5 on the B750 Prom 31 or whatever they end up calling that thing. So this is what I expect to see as an improvement because it's a natural, you know, upgrade thing. Because the thing is, a lot of people seem to think that because AMD lets you upgrade to the next, you know, the newer CPU and stay on the same socket, that there's no reason to buy a new motherboard. And that is true. However, that's really bad news to, you know, people like ASUS, MSI, Gigabyte, ASRock, BioStar, you know, all those guys. They don't like it when you go to Micro Center and buy a new Zen 5 CPU and then completely ignore any of the new motherboards on the shelf. So the way that they create value with the next generation will be by providing incremental new upgrades, such as running Gen 5 on the chipset. You know, stuff like that. So that's kind of what I expect to see happening next year. Now, it could be that the top one is Gen 5, but maybe this one still is Gen 4, or maybe it just ends up being Gen 5 everywhere. I don't know. But, you know, that's the kind of natural progression, because we know that the AM5 socket can handle Gen 5 right here. The problem is the chipset today can't do Gen 5. But that doesn't mean that a newer chipset, aka B750, can't do Gen 5 in the future. So let's move on. So now we've got over here PCIe 5.0 bus that goes directly into the CPU. So this will have a total of 24 lanes available. 16 of them go to the graphics card. Actually, let's redo this. So they actually go to a switch. On this ASUS motherboard, there's actually a switch here. A PLX chip is what they call it. So there's a switch. And what the switch does is it says, if the graphics card is connected, I will give it 16 lanes. Well, actually, hold on. Is that right? Yeah, there's a switch. There's a switch. So there's 16 lanes here. And then over here, there's 4 lanes. And this goes to M.2 underscore was it A or 1 or whatever? What was the name of it? I have to look at the thing again. M.2_1. And then there's another one. 4 more lanes. M.2_2. So what this means is that with the ASUS ProArt Creator X670E, with this motherboard, that means that you can buy Gen 5 SSDs, a total of 2 of them, and you can get both of them running full PCIe Gen 5 speed directly into the CPU, which means you bypass the chipset. There's no going through the chipset. It goes straight into the CPU, full bandwidth, PCIe 5, 4 lanes, direct. So 2 drives supported, just like on my Gigabyte X670E Aorus Master. So, but what's different here is with the switch. The switch will say here, this guy can either be X16 or well, we'll just say or 8. He can be X16 or X8. The other one over here, where there's 8 lanes total, can either be X0, meaning it's turned off, there's nothing plugged in, or if something's plugged in, X8. So the conditions are, if the graphics card is installed, X16, assuming that nothing is installed on the second slot. Otherwise, else if something is installed in the second slot, run the graphics card at half bandwidth, X8. So that's what the switch does. That's pretty standard stuff. None of this stuff is new. Pretty much every motherboard in since the last 10 years has been doing this. If you have like an X8 second slot on the motherboard. So for example, if we go back to the motherboard block diagram, what that looks like physically is this. PCI X16-1. If the graphics card is installed up here and the second slot is completely empty with nothing plugged in, the graphics card gets full 16 lanes. Else, if something is plugged in down here, such as a second graphics card for Crossfire, because you can't do SLI, this motherboard doesn't support SLI, you can't do it, you can't even do NVLink. Even if you connect the bridge, it still won't work, because ASUS did not pay NVIDIA the SLI licensing fee, or the NVLink licensing fee, to enable that feature on the motherboard. So, you can't do dual NVIDIA GPUs on this motherboard. You can install 2 GPUs, just don't expect to try to turn on SLI. But anyway, as soon as something is plugged into the second slot, the graphics card slot, the top slot, will turn into X8. Can X4 Gen 5 turn into X16 Gen 3 links? You have to have a really expensive piece of hardware to do something like that. So the answer is yes, you can, but like with the motherboard as is, you can't. So you'd have to plug in something into like the M.2 form factor, which typically that wouldn't even be the right form factor for that, which would then basically fabricate the lanes out to the lower speeds. So essentially it would be a splitter of some sort that takes one lane and then kind of like well, not really demultiplex, but it would basically like it would fan out the single, each one of those 4 lanes into 4 more lanes of Gen 4. So in theory, you could do something like that, but as it stands today, there isn't really anything that exists that can do what you're asking. Okay, so I think everybody understands. I don't think this is too confusing so far in terms of how these 2 PCIe slots work. So essentially, these 2 PCIe slots are both wired directly to the CPU socket, and this top M.2 slot is wired directly to the socket. And then the second one right here, so this one over here, this one is also wired directly to the socket. Now, one thing that ASUS has incorrectly labeled, this is actually wrong of them to show like AMD X670 here and AMD X670 here. Technically, this should be AMD B650 and B650 because two B650 chipsets together equals X670. There's no such thing as a single X670 chip. Like so this is technically wrong. But I understand why they have labeled it this way. They've labeled it this way so that the average consumer who doesn't actually know what a B650 chipset is or an X670 chipset is won't get confused when they go and buy a ProArt, awesome ProArt $500 motherboard, and then they look at the manual and it's like, why does it say B650 on these two things? See, technically these are B650 chips though. So anyway, they did it to cut down on people calling in and asking like why. So anyway, so these two down here, M.2_3 and M.2_4, these two go to the chipset. And then the one over here is sharing lanes with this bottom PCIe slot. So as shown right here. So now we're going to draw this out. So the way this works is, and I'm going to assume the way ASUS did this is, well, now here's the thing. Here's where I cannot be 100% certain because I'm having to make educated guesses based off of what is in the documentation. So every B650 chipset has a PCI Gen 4 bus and a PCI Gen 3 bus. So this one on the left, I'll label it as PCI 4.0 bus. And on this one, on the first chipset, there are four lanes of Gen 4 available. There are 4 lanes. And then on this one over here, this is PCI 3.0 bus with 4 lanes available. Oh, whoops. Sorry about that, guys. I was showing the wrong thing. Okay, there we go. You guys weren't seeing that. So what I was saying was every chipset has both a 4.0 bus and a 3.0 bus. Now, in the case of the first one, so the primary chipset, because this is the primary, this one's the secondary, the primary chipset will have 4 lanes on its 4.0 bus and 4 lanes on its 3.0 bus. Now, for the secondary chipset, it has a 4.0 bus, but it has 8 lanes available. And then over here, on the 3.0 bus, it has 4 lanes available. So the 3.0 bus for each chip, each B650 chipset, is always going to have 4 lanes. They're always going to be the same count. The primary will have 4 lanes for the 4.0, and the secondary will have 8 lanes for the 4.0. Now, the reason why the primary has less lanes is because 4 of the lanes that would have totaled 8 are utilized as a downstream, downlink interface to the second chipset. If the second chipset was disconnected, then we would have 8 lanes up here available. So what that means is that it's very easy to derive a B650 motherboard from this diagram. In order to make a B650 motherboard, all we have to do is remove the primary chipset and just connect the CPU directly to the bottom chipset. And that is a B650 motherboard. Same lane count. So anyway, so that makes sense. So now what this means is we have 4 lanes here. Now, 4 lanes available means that this can be, this will go to, just like this up there, a switch. There'll be a switch here. Again, we have a switch. And then, on this switch, just like that top one, it's going to split lanes. So the first one is going to be X4 or X2. The second one is going to be nothing or X2. So the first one is going to be M.2_3. The second one is going to be PCIe 4.0, I guess 4? Well, it's 4.0 speed because the bus is 4.0. But I think it's 3 was the number. What was the number on the diagram? PCIe. I hate the way ASUS labels it because they're saying 16_3, but it's actually not 16 lanes. So they label it in the manual as 16_3. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and label these. So anyone who is like trying to follow along can easily understand like where these things are on the motherboard. So this is the 4.0 lanes allocated on the primary chipset. They go to a switch. So that takes care of all 4 lanes on the primary chipset. So now for the PCI 3.0 bus. Now this is where it could get tricky. I gotta think about this because the motherboard has 4 SATA interfaces. Now what I want to know is what is the SATA drive, like what do they label the SATA drives as? Because that could be a key indicator of how ASUS is doing their lane allocation. Because what's cool about ASUS, it's a double-edged sword. It's bad because they don't give you the block diagram, so you don't know 100% how it's wired internally. But what's cool about it is that people like me get to play a guessing game trying to figure out like where this stuff is actually cabled or wired or soldered on the motherboard. So they literally say 4 SATA ports right here at the bottom. And it says AMD RAID Expert 2 supports NVMe RAID 01 and SATA, and they basically tell you that you can do it on all of the drives. So that means they are not using as media splitters for PCI Gen 3. Okay, so what that means, so we go back here, that means that what they've done is every single one of these 4 lanes is physically wired to a SATA port. So we have SATA 1, 2, 3, and 4. They're all just kind of there. SATA 1, 2, 3, 4. You get 4 SATA ports. You can do RAID 0, RAID 10. Was it RAID 5, I think was the other one? Or no, RAID 0, RAID 1, RAID 10. Yeah, that's right. So all of the lanes are going to SATA. Now, what I don't know, because I do not know 100%, because I'm having to make an educated guess, I don't know if this is actually how they're doing it, or if they've actually wired SATA down here on the second one. I hope that makes sense. I'm having to guess, and we're just gonna, for simplicity, we're gonna say that the SATA ports are on the primary chipset. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the second chipset because we've taken into account all the lanes. So now down here, this is where we're probably gonna need more space. Probably gonna need a little bit more space, but anyway, I'll try to make do with what we've got. So the second chipset has to house a lot of things. So far, we need to allocate the final M.2 drive. You were tempted to get this board? This board is actually a pretty nice motherboard. The only problem is the documentation is very, very sparse, so it's very hard to figure out what actually is physically wired where. Okay, so next we've got the final M.2 underscore 4. So the last PCI 4.0 M.2 drive is down here. And it doesn't share anything, so it gets full bandwidth. So that takes half of the 8 lanes. That means the remaining 4 lanes have to go to other things. Now, ASUS is giving us 10 gigabit LAN. And there's also something very, very big that's going to take up a lot of space, and we haven't figured out where exactly that goes. So I'm going to have to guess it's on the PCI 3.0 bus. Because what else do we have here? We have a 10 gigabit LAN. We need Wi-Fi. And then there's that really large thing. Now, what I want to know is, in the motherboard, is there... Oh, let me go back and look at the motherboard again. So let's go look at the motherboard again. So we've got those. We got this thing. It shares bandwidth. 1, 2, 3, 4. There's 4 SATA. Is there only 4 SATA or is there 6 SATA? I think there's only 4. Hold on. So we've got USB 2.2 or 2x2, the 20 gigabit USB. On the front panel, another 20 gigabit USB. Okay, so I forgot to label the USB. We'll do USB at the end. So it's got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. So the Wi-Fi 6E takes 1 lane. This takes 1 PCIe lane of either Gen 3 or Gen 4, doesn't matter. And then the they've got dual LAN. Okay. So they've got a Marvell 10 gigabit Ethernet on here, and they have an Intel gigabit 2.5 on here. So the Intel 2.5 gigabit Ethernet takes 1 lane of PCI Gen 3 or Gen 4, and then the Marvell 10 gigabit Ethernet takes 2 lanes of Gen 4, or, well, actually, I think you can do 2 lanes on Gen 3. So now the only question is, where is the USB 4 going to go? Because this could go on Gen 3. So I have to guess now where it's going to go. Okay. So here's how I'm going to allocate this. I'm going to assume that ASUS, because we take 4 lanes, that's going to be all. And then we have 1, 2 for Marvell, 3, 4. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to assume that the way ASUS did this is for forward compatibility. But however, that doesn't really matter because they essentially have they have essentially soldered Intel's JHL on here. So what they've done is they've taken the other 4. You know what? No, I think they haven't done it that way. I think they've done this in a different way. I think what they've done is over here, they've got 2 lanes for 10 gig LAN. So that's 6 out of 8. So that means we have 2 lanes left. 1 lane will go to Wi-Fi 6E. And the final lane on this bus, the very last lane, goes to the standard Intel 2.5 gig LAN. So this is how I think they've done this. So you have 4 lanes to Gen 4, to the final drive, 2 lanes to the 10 gigabit LAN, 1 lane to the Wi-Fi, and 1 lane to the 2.5 gig LAN. So that all totals to 8 lanes. So every lane is accounted for on the secondary chipset. Okay, now, the big mystery. What goes on the 3.0 bus? So down here, what they've done is they've taken all 4 Gen 3 lanes and they have physically soldered to the board. And people who have watched a lot of my motherboard analysis videos probably know exactly what I'm going to type in here. But they have the Intel JHL 8540 Thunderbolt 4/USB 4 40 gig USB controller. They have this physically soldered, included on the motherboard, which means you do not need to buy a Thunderbolt add-in card for this motherboard. In fact, you can't actually use one with this motherboard. Not only do they not include a 4-lane, well, you'd have to use this which is not ideal because you're cutting your GPU to X8 if you do that. But the other reason why you can't do it is because they don't give you the Thunderbolt header to plug it in, because they physically already soldered the header to the controller on the motherboard. So that is what they've plugged in there. And then on the outbound, they have 40 gig USB 4 with display. So with DisplayPort out. So you have video out capability on both of those USB 4 out. So you have two USB 4s out here. So this is the 40 gig. And then you have, you know what? Now that I think about it, they might actually have, I might actually have this backwards. It kind of doesn't really matter, but either, okay, the way I see it is either this is where it is, or it's actually up here on the first chipset, and then the SATA stuff is down there. Doesn't really matter. All the lanes are accounted for, but that's just something to keep in mind, because I'm only being able to make an educated guess based off of what we know, because ASUS does not publish the actual block diagram. So I'm either 100% right, or I have these two things backwards, or I might have these two things backwards, meaning they might have put the Intel stuff on the 4.0 bus, and then they would have put all the networking stuff over here. So it's very, very hard to get that right. But the bottom line is all the lanes are accounted for, and this logically makes sense from an engineering standpoint. So that's everything except the USB. I'll go ahead and add that just so those know. Like typically the integrated audio, so the integrated audio codec on the back is wired via USB 2.0 directly to the CPU, because the AMD chipset is unique in that it actually features, or the AMD socket, I should say, is unique in that it actually wires USB ports directly to the CPU, bypassing the chipset. Intel, this is a very big difference between Intel and AMD. Intel will never send a USB port directly, or they'll never wire a USB port directly to the CPU socket. Any USB peripheral that you connect into the motherboard will always go through the chipset. It will never go to the CPU directly. Now, for the 20 gig USB, those go to the chipset. So, for example, ASUS listed a USB 3.2 Gen 2x2 on the rear of the motherboard. So that one goes to the primary chipset. The other one that they listed is another USB 3.2 Gen 2x2, which is a front panel connector, provided the case provides that connectivity. That one goes to the secondary chipset. USB 3.2 Gen 2x2. So these are the 20 gigabit USB. This is the front panel connector. So you got two 20 gigs, one here on the back of the motherboard, another one for the case, for the front panel, if you have one, if you have a case that has that, and then you get two 40 gig USB off of the Intel Thunderbolt 4 controller. So what that means is the ProArt Creator, the reason why they market it as the Creator motherboard is because it gives you USB 4 with full PCIe tunneling pass-through capability via the Thunderbolt 4 controller. So this motherboard is backwards compatible with Thunderbolt 4 and USB 40 gig speeds, as well as DisplayPort out on 2 of those interfaces on the back of the motherboard. So now we can actually go look at the motherboard itself on the product page. Where is this thing? Okay. So let's bring this back up. How do I zoom into the... Alright, I want to see the back of this thing. Okay, so right here. Right here. See, it even tells you. Intel JHL 8540 controller. So it literally told us that. I didn't even know that it listed it there. But anyway. So 40 gig right there. Intel JHL 8540, that is literally the Thunderbolt 4 controller. But because this is an AMD motherboard, it's politically incorrect to say Thunderbolt, so you have to say USB 4, because it gets all political. So anyway, USB 4, 40 gig, 2 ports right there. They both support display out, and you also have a DisplayPort input for USB 4. So what that means is if you plug a video card or some sort of video input into this DisplayPort right here, it will feed that video out via one of these 2 40 gig USB 4 ports on the back. Hey, MedPrism. Oh, software, you were tempted to get the board. This is a pretty good motherboard. The only thing I don't like about this motherboard is the fact that it's $500. It is missing the postcode debug LED. In my mind, if a motherboard is going to cost around $500, it better come with a postcode debug LED. The fact that this thing has omitted that is unacceptable, in my mind. But, I mean, they're trying to make it up to you by giving you all this USB 40 stuff. However, there are other motherboards that do the same thing, aka ASRock Tai Chi, and it also gives you the postcode debug on the Tai Chi. So anyway, there you go. That is the ASUS ProArt Creator. That is the full diagram, block diagram. I forgot, the one thing I'll also add here is the HDMI for the integrated graphics. The HDMI goes directly to the CPU for the integrated graphics processor. The DisplayPort input on the back of the motherboard is also here, down here on the Thunderbolt controller. Okay, so that's the full diagram for that. Also, the 2 good PCI 5 are so close together. Yes, and it has the X8 and the X8 capability on the PCI 5. But this is a pretty solid motherboard considering what it has, because you do get full support for 2 Gen 5 drives, no sharing, no lanes getting split, and all that stuff. So full bandwidth. This guy down here is 4.0, and he will get split down to X2 if you plug something in to that bottom PCIe slot. However, the bottom PCIe slot is only 2 lanes, so it's not really that useful. Considering this thing has a 10 gig LAN included, which typically takes 2 lanes, this is kind of useless. In my mind at least. So that's kind of the only negative thing about this motherboard. The 3rd slot is kind of a waste. But, you know, I don't know. This would have been nice if this was a full X4. Like, what I would have rather seen them do is, instead of, like, leaving this running at X2, I would have disabled this completely and given all 4 lanes to this thing. So, that way you could run, like, an Elgato 4K 60 or AverMedia 4K 60 capture card in that slot. Oh yeah, you're using the Discord name. I just now noticed that. Okay. Hey Joel. So anyway, that's the ASUS ProArt Creator X670E. It's a decent motherboard, although it is really pricey. So I would say, unless you really need USB 4, aka Thunderbolt 4, or you need the 2 X8 lanes, it's a decent one. However, I personally would recommend 2 alternatives to this. So, what I would recommend instead of this is either the ASRock Tai Chi, okay, if we're talking about the Intel stuff, so the Thunderbolt, ASRock Tai Chi, let's do it this way. If TB4 USB 4 is required, you know, then that. Else, if not, meaning you don't need USB 4 or Thunderbolt 4, then I recommend Gigabyte X670E Aorus Master, or which can actually let you add Thunderbolt via an add-in card, I will add, or the MSI Carbon Wi-Fi, the MPG X670E Carbon Wi-Fi. These are very good alternatives to this ASUS ProArt Creator. So that's what I would recommend for somebody who is looking at the ProArt Creator. The thing is, the Tai Chi sacrifices this down here. This doesn't exist on the Tai Chi. But these guys give you a fully independent 4 lanes of this. The ASRock includes the Thunderbolt. The Gigabyte one does not include the Thunderbolt, but you can add the Thunderbolt via a add-in card, which I have shown on my channel. I have a video showing how to manually add the Intel Thunderbolt controller to a Gigabyte Aorus Master. And you can also add it to a lot of more inexpensive motherboards in like the $300 range. Like, for instance, a X670 Aorus Elite could do the same thing. Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. That's right. It has 10 gig LAN at $500. So yeah, I guess I should also say, if you need the 10 gig LAN, then yes. Then this is a good one. The only thing it doesn't have is the postcode. This thing would be a solid recommendation from me if you had the postcode. The reason why I don't... Typically the 10 gig LAN, I oftentimes overlook the 10 gig LAN, because unless you are running like a home network that is going to benefit from 10 gig LAN, for your typical use case, 10 gig LAN doesn't really matter, because you're usually limited by your internet service provider's maximum speed anyway, which is not going to be 10 gig unless you have a commercial account, and that sort of thing. So, and that's going to be very, very expensive internet every month. So, USB switch to change between 2 computers. Oh, the KVM. 4-port USB 3.0 hub. Is that like a KVM? What is that? What does it do? I'll look at it. Oh wait, you did get this, so you can switch between the 2 computers with a mouse and keyboard a lot easier. Oh, okay, so it's kind of like a KVM switch. Okay. Yeah, I'll have to check that out, because I don't know, like right now, the way I do it is, so my other computer is literally right next to me over here, and it has its own keyboard and mouse. And that's the one for all the benchmarking. Okay, yeah, let me see. So you got the, what is this? Oh, somebody drew this? Where did somebody get this? Or did they draw it themselves? This looks like... It looks like somebody took the Gigabyte block diagrams and someone literally took a Gigabyte diagram and then like tried to turn it into an ASUS diagram. But anyway, I was gonna draw out the Z790 next. I don't need the diagram. I don't know if that's 100% exact. That could still be an estimate though. That could have been somebody just doing what I'm doing, estimating how it looks. Most likely that is an estimate, because those labels in that picture that you just sent, that's literally taken from the Gigabyte motherboard. Okay, so this is the ProArt Creator. Now let's look at the Z, because Joey had asked about the Maximus Z790 Hero. Let me see, did these guys do the... It looks like they did label it correctly, although I'm not 100% sure about some of these things. There might be some errors in this. I'm going to go ahead and do my own. But anyway, let's go ahead and clear this off. Let's delete everything. And that's going to blind everybody for a second. There we go. Okay, so now this next one we're going to look at is an Intel motherboard. So this one's going to be Z... Oh, I always forget to change the color. Z790 Maximus. So this is going to be another ASUS motherboard. ASUS Z790 Maximus Hero. So this is going to be this one. And now let me go find the link. Okay. So here is the website. Okay, 246. Okay, now all we need to do is we need to look at the tech specs, and then we're gonna look at the manual. So here we have again four. Why did it do that? Okay, 4 DIMM, 128 gig max, just like with the other one. The only difference here that I'll point out is not only do you see these higher overclock numbers, but the standard non-overclock is higher, which means this is a second generation DDR5 memory controller. Because if you go look at the in fact, let's go ahead and do that right now. Z690 Maximus Hero. Let's go look at the old Z690 for Alder Lake. Let's look at this one. So this guy says this one might actually be the better one, but let's look at this first. So for overclocking, no, it's not gonna be better. So right here, so the original one, Z690 Hero, I don't know why ASUS's page keeps jumping around. 128 gig, but look at this. So the official speed supported by the motherboard is 4,800 megatransfers per second on the DDR5. So everything above 4,800 on the Z690 Hero is not guaranteed. It is technically an overclock. What that means is that if you ever open up a support ticket with ASUS, and if you have a Z690 Hero, and you start telling them that your computer is blue screening or games crash occasionally, they're going to ask you for things like what's the memory speed running at. And if you tell them that your RAM is running at anything above 4,800 megatransfers per second, they'll literally close the case on you and say, sorry, I can't help you. So I'm just pointing that out there because just because you buy RAM that says 6,000 megahertz or 6,400 megahertz, that doesn't mean that's 100% supported. And anything with an OC next to it is not supported by ASUS. They're not going to help you if something's going wrong. And if you start telling them that your RAM is running at 5,600 or whatever. Now, that brings us to the newer one, the Z790. The Z790 officially supports up to 5,600 on the RAM. So that's better than the Z690. That's also better than the AMD X670 and X670E, because as we just saw, AMD, the official support for the AMD board is 5,200. So this one's 5,600. And then the old Z690 is 4,800. So that shows you how second generation memory controllers improve compatibility. Okay, so hold on. Whoa, what? Is this the 1K one? No. No, the Hero one is like 600, 700, somewhere in that range. All right. Are you going? Okay, hold on. Let's, all right. So you guys can do the chat in there. So what we're going to look at is how this is wired. I don't know why this website keeps jumping around. It's really annoying. We might have to just open up the manual because this is super annoying. I literally tap the mouse and it scrolls down automatically. Okay, so let's look at the Z790 motherboard. All I really need to see is... wow, there's a lot of, why are they showing... Where's the... What's all this stuff with the RAM? Did I open the wrong document? Oh, BIOS manual, no wonder. Okay, here we go. Okay, so, well, before we look into the motherboard, I'm just going to draw the groundwork first because the Intel one is a little bit easier in the sense that you have two things. You literally just have the CPU block. So you have the LGA 1700. Yeah, ASUS's website is really annoying. You have the LGA 1700. Is there anything else about this? Oh, I think that's it. Okay, and then the you have the chipset, and everything goes to the chipset because there's no dual chipset. It's just one chipset. So we have to make it. Well, we don't really need to make it large because we just need the two. Well, maybe there's two buses, but anyway. This is the Z790 chipset. Okay, so then you have your uplink, just like with the AMD. You have the same uplink thing. Intel uses something different though. Intel uses a proprietary thing called DMI. It is the something management interface, the discrete management interface, or something management interface. So there's 8 lanes here. Or no, it's, wait a minute, hold on. It's DMI 4.0, if I remember correctly, 4.0 X8. Yeah. That's their, now I gotta know what this stands for. Intel DMI. Direct Media Interface. Okay, that's what it stands for. Direct Media Interface. Okay. So on LGA 1700, you get a PCI 5.0 bus, just like with AMD. However, this one is significantly different. This one has a total of 16 lanes of Gen 5 available, whereas the X670E is 24 lanes of Gen 5 available. direct to the CPU. This goes direct to the CPU as well. However, all those lanes typically go directly to the graphics card. However, with these Z790 motherboards, so this would have applied to Z690. However, Z790 made some change to try to be able to advertise Gen 5 storage. So in order to do that, what they have done is they've put a switch here. Just like with what we saw on that Crater board. But they're using the switch for a different purpose. So now we need to go look at the manual to figure out what they're actually doing. So let's see. So, okay, Intel Thunderbolt 4. So just like with that ProArt creator, this also includes the exact same JHL8540 for the dual 40 gig USB. It's always going to be 2. Notice how it's always 2. The reason why it's always going to be dual 40 gig USB is because the Thunderbolt controller from Intel only has 2 40 gig ports on it. So that's why it's always going to be 2. If it's only 1, it means that the motherboard manufacturer cheaped out and they literally only soldered one of them active. The other one is literally unused. So now we have 2 of this. Okay, so they have the same thing. Okay, so they do that. So hold on. Does this thing have any Gen 5 at all? Oh, it does. So, but there's going to be some lane sharing here. This one supports Gen 4, Gen 4, Gen 4, Gen 4. Okay, when, right here, when the ROG Hyper M.2 is installed in G51, Hyper M.2 underscore selected support PCI 4.0, when it is installed in this one, can support Gen 5. When the Hyper M.2 is installed on PCI X16 G4, what is this G5 and G4? I really need to see what this thing looks like. This thing's really confusing. Where is... Okay. That doesn't help. Oh, okay, this helps. This helps. This helps a lot. So, here we go. Just like I said in previous videos, this proves my point again, that in order to get Gen 5 storage on the Z790, it has to take from the graphics card lanes. So, right here, M.2, the primary, and one thing that they do that's really dumb is they always use the top slot, because the problem with doing this is that anybody who buys this motherboard and they assume that the top one is the one for their Windows drive because it's the closest one to the CPU. However, as soon as they plug their M.2 drive in this top slot, they just cut their graphics card slot down to X8. They literally shaved off half of their GPU lanes as soon as they plug an M.2 drive into this top slot. So you get X8, so it's basically X16, and then or X8, X8, and X4. So this guy is always going to be X4. This thing's only ever going to be X8. So where was that again? We got to go back up here again. It says where's the Hyper M.2? Hyper M.2 is installed in the top, wait, Gen 5 underscore 1, Gen 5 underscore 2. Oh, okay, wait. So when, hold on. This is Gen 5. G5 means Gen 5, Gen 5, Gen 4. So when the M.2 is installed in the Gen 5 slot, this is 4.0? Wait, Hyper M.2 slots? What's Hyper M.2? It doesn't have that DIMM. Where's the Hyper M.2? Is this like an add-in card? I don't understand what this Hyper M.2 is. Oh, it's an expansion card. Okay. So then why would it matter? Why would it not be Gen 5 if it's installed in the top slot? That doesn't make any sense. It says when the Hyper M.2 card is installed in the top slot, the Hyper M.2 _1 can support Gen 4. When the Hyper M.2 card is installed in the second one, the Hyper M.2 slot. Oh, this, okay. So Hyper M.2 1 is a physical M.2 slot on the motherboard, and it can run at X5 when this is connected. That's interesting. So you can put 2 on the card. It would install in the second slot. Okay. Okay, I understand now. I didn't know that it was a... Okay, I didn't know that the Hyper M.2 card was a X8 card. I thought it was an X4 card. Okay, so now I understand what's going on. So now we can draw this out. Well, hold on. Let me look at what else we've got. So we have Intel 2.5. We have the Wi-Fi 6E with the Bluetooth. There's the Thunderbolt stuff. And then we have a bunch of USB again. And that's basically it. Okay, so how many M.2s we got here? 4, 5? Storage. 1 supports 4.0. Hyper M.2 slot. Key M. Via Hyper M.2 card. Support. What the heck? What does that mean? Like, what? This doesn't make any sense. So you have, there's a slot. There's M.2 _1, and then there's Hyper M.2 _1. Oh, Hyper M.2 is on the actual expansion card. Okay, so Hyper M.2 1 is not on the motherboard. Okay, that's confusing me. And this guy is using 4 LAN. That makes sense. Okay, I see. So that means that they aren't actually doing the gimmicky thing that the other motherboards are doing, if I'm understanding this correctly. So Hyper M.2. Okay. When this is installed, it's Gen 5. Okay. So this motherboard doesn't do the gimmicky thing that almost every Z790 motherboards do. This motherboard is literally just a Z690 motherboard in disguise. Okay. ASUS is playing an even more fancy game than I originally thought. So, okay, that's cool. So that means that they're not actually doing any kind of weird, you think they show up? Oh, of the Hyper M.2. Okay, I get it. I get what the Hyper M.2 is. Okay, so let's go back to the block diagram. So this essentially is the same as the ProArt creator. So you have two PCIe slots. Both, so it can be X16 or X8. And then this one is X8 or X0 if nothing is there, or X8. And then I think there was like another thing saying it could be X4 in the manual. So right here. Okay, no, that's just that. So this thing, so this M.2 _1 can only do Gen 4 speed. This top slot is different from what I thought it was. I thought this was capable of Gen 5. But according to the manual, this top slot doesn't actually support Gen 5, which is actually a good thing. Because if this supported Gen 5, it would take half of the GPU lanes to pull that stunt off. So, okay, so it doesn't actually support Gen 5 on the physical board for the M.2 slots. So the only way you can do Gen 5 SSDs on the Z790 Hero is via an expansion card. There is actually no Gen 5 M.2 slot natively, physically on this motherboard. So see, like this one, Gen 4. Second one, Gen 4. Third one, Gen 4 and backwards compatible with SATA. And is that it? 1, 2, there's just 3? There's just 3. Oh, I thought there was going to be 4. Okay. That's not good, but we'll see what they've decided to do with that. Okay. So, it actually has less than I thought it had. So again, that doesn't change this. So you have 16 total here of Gen 5 lanes. So the way that you would run the Gen 5 storage would be via the Hyper M.2 card physically connected in the second slot. That would give you 2 drives. Yes, the 2 on the card. That would go here, and that would each take 4 lanes and 4 lanes for a total of 8 lanes. So, and then the graphics card would be running at X8. So the problem with this motherboard is it's no different from any Intel motherboard that wants to run Gen 5 SSDs. In order to run Gen 5 SSDs, it takes half of the lanes in order to do that via the second PCIe slot. So it has that same limitation. The only thing that's different is there is no physical M.2 slot that also takes those lanes. Because what ASUS did is, well, not ASUS, the Intel motherboard, the Intel design features a PCI 4.0 bus that goes to the CPU, which has 4 lanes available. And those lanes in this motherboard goes to the M.2_1. M.2_1. You could put in the third PCIe slot with only with one M.2. Oh, is the third one Gen 5? The third one's Gen 4. So that's not going to be Gen 5. Let me make sure. So we go back here again. It says right here, 1 PCI 4.0 X16 supports X4 modes. So that's Gen 4. It's only Gen 4. It can't do Gen 5 on that bottom slot. And I think it says that too, somewhere in here. When the HyperCard is installed in the top slot or the second slot, wait, is installed on, wait a minute, why is it labeling it? Do they have these names backwards? No, this is G5.1 and G5.2. Do you see why I don't buy ASUS motherboards anymore? Does it take so long to figure out what goes where? Okay, ASUS Hyper M.2_1 can do 4.0 speed. When the Hyper M.2 is installed in... Why does it keep saying... Are these the things on the card itself? Oh, no. These are the slots. Yeah, that's the top slot. This doesn't make any sense. When it's installed in the top slot, it should be doing Gen 5, not Gen 4. I think this is a mistype. This is a mistype. It has to be. When it's installed on the second slot, the M.2, why M.2_, why is it saying Hyper M.2.1 can support 5.0 speed? What? 5? What is this? Is this the physical... Well, oh, wait. Okay, is this the first M.2 on the expansion card itself? When Hyper M.2 is installed on the third slot, Hyper M.2.1 and Hyper M.2 run at 4.0 speed. That's on the card. Okay, so Hyper M.2.1 and Hyper M.2.2 are physically on the expansion card. They're not on the motherboard. So when it's installed in the... I don't think this is correct information. I think that ASUS is shooting themselves in the foot here when they say this. When ROG M.2 is installed in the top slot, which we know is full 16 lanes of Gen 5, Hyper M.2 1 can support Gen 4? I think that should read Gen 5. Because what's really weird is it doesn't say what happens to the Hyper M.2 underscore 2. Is Hyper M.2 underscore 2 running at Gen 5, but the first one only runs at Gen 4? And then when Hyper M.2 is installed in the second slot, Hyper M.2 1 is 5.0. It doesn't say anything about the second one. When Hyper M.2 card is installed on this, okay. So, hold on. There's got to be something in here talking about the actual expansion card itself. Where's the expansion card? There's got to be a section on the expansion card. Okay, here we go. Here we go. Situation for the Hyper M.2. So, if it's in the top slot, it only does Gen 4, and this thing doesn't work. And then when it goes in... Why? That's a 16-lane slot. Then when it goes in the second slot, you get Gen 5 and Gen 4? Okay. And then when it goes in the bottom slot, they're both Gen 4, which is correct. Wait, how is that possible? How is that possible? There's only like 4 lanes. Is there 8 lanes down there? Is that 8 lanes? When it is installed in this, it can support X4. When it is installed in the second, it can support X5 or 5.0. When it's installed in the third one, wait, when it's installed on... What? When it is installed on the top slot or the second slot, the second M.2 will be disabled. Okay. When Hyper M.2 is installed on the third slot, the first Hyper M.2 and the second run at 4.0 speeds. So, we recommend installing it in the third slot. I recommend installing it in the third slot too, which also means that you can't actually do PCI 5.0 on here properly. I mean, it looks like you can do it on the second slot, but then you take half of the GPU lanes to do that. So it's no different from any other Z790 motherboard. In the sense that the only way to do Gen 5 is to peel lanes away from the GPU. So that's the only way you can get it to work. That is a really strange Hyper M.2 card. I don't understand why it disables the secondary one when it's in the top slot. Because the expansion card itself is physically wired for 8 lanes. So why does it turn off half of it when it's in an X16 slot, which clearly has enough lanes? So I don't understand this one. In my mind, this should read, when it is in the top slot, both Hyper M.2 1 and Hyper M.2 should be running at PCI 5.0 X4. That's the way I think it's supposed to work, but it's because the fact that this does what it does tells me that there's some kind of weird, you know what? This card might be a self-bifurcating card. I don't know. This is where a builder buy would come in handy, but I think, because I'm not an expert in these expansion cards, but I'm thinking that the card itself, the Hyper M.2 card, might be a self-bifurcating card, because it sounds like it automatically runs in these modes depending on which slot it's plugged into. Which means you don't need to go into the BIOS to tell it how to bifurcate the lanes. So this might be a self-bifurcating card that only operates, like it meaning if it detects Gen 5 lanes on the wire, it will turn off the second one, and then it will downregulate the first one to Gen 5. Now, what I don't understand is why it does this in the second slot, because these both have enough lanes. I don't understand. This is very confusing. I don't know how... the only one that makes sense to me is this one. This is the only one that makes sense. And even then, it doesn't make sense, because technically this should be 5.0 as well, unless it's some limitation with the card itself. I'm going to guess that it's a problem with the card itself. There's probably not enough signal retiming units on the physical card, which means that the Hyper M.2_2, that slot specifically, is not designed to do Gen 5. Only the M.2_1 is designed to handle Gen 5. Now, why it behaves differently between these two slots doesn't make any sense. A BIOS update on the card? Because I don't think a BIOS update on the motherboard is going to change any of that. Because it sounds like there's some kind of bifurcating chip on the physical Hyper M.2 card itself that manages these operating modes, depending on what it detects on the wire, on the PCIe slot. So the only thing that doesn't make sense to me is why is the top slot and the second slot different? Because there shouldn't be any difference in the way these two operate. So anyway, that is the way that you would get Gen 5 storage working on this motherboard. Now we can look at the remaining part of the chipset. So this thing is 4 lanes of Gen 4, and the total CPU lanes, if you count them, is 16 plus 4, so you get 20 lanes to the CPU. They're limited to 16 lanes to play around with. 16 lanes for what? Not for the card, no. The Hyper M.2 card physically has 8 lanes. It doesn't have 16 lanes on the physical card itself. All right, and then you get over here, just like with the AMD motherboard, you get PCIe 4.0 bus on the chipset. And I believe on this one you get 16 lanes. And then here you get 8 PCI 3.0 lanes. You get 8 lanes available here. Just double check to make sure I'm not wrong. Let me just look at that diagram that Joey had sent over. You get 20. So 20, 4, 8, 3. Oh, okay, it's 20, not 16. So this is wrong. Wait, hold on a second, because there's 4. Yeah, okay, so there's 4 more. So that's actually 20 lanes. I knew something didn't seem right. Like I was like, how am I gonna wire up that Thunderbolt controller? So you get 20 lanes of Gen 4 here, and then I think 8 lanes. Yeah, so that's right, 8 lanes. Okay, so we have 8 lanes over here, and then we have 20 lanes over here. That's a lot of lanes of Gen 4 on the chipset. But remember what I said earlier, the Intel socket does not accept any USB or SATA ports natively. They have to go through the chipset. They cannot go directly to the CPU. So that means you're going to need to use more lanes downstream in order to get similar connectivity. So for starters, most of this is going to go to M.2 storage. So we have, I think this motherboard had, did it have 4 total? This motherboard is an interesting one. Where's the SATA? Okay, it only has 3. It only has 3. One of them is 4.0, and it goes directly to the processor, so I've already drawn that. That's M.2_1. Then M.2_2, 4.0 to the chipset. And then _2 or _3 supports SATA backwards compatibility. So that's going to take some SATA drivers and or lanes. And that's going to go to the chipset also. So this one has only 2. Okay, so that makes sense because we're going to put the Thunderbolt controller here. So over here, well, technically, what do we need all those 3.0 lanes for? So this could actually go over here because it's going to be 4 lanes. And this motherboard had 6, or did it have 4 SATA? I think it's 6 SATA. Yeah, 6 SATA. Why are there E1, E2? RAID configuration and boot drives are not supported on E1 and E2. But you can do RAID on the first 4. It means the first 4 are going through the... Well, they're all going through the chipset. See? So you got... the SATA can do RAID on 1 through 4, but it cannot do it on these 2. So that means that these 2 are going through an AS Media? Why would they need to do that? I don't know. I'm not really impressed with the way ASUS has allocated a lot of the stuff on here. So I'm going to have to put this over here. So this is the Thunderbolt controller. It's over here. TB4, USB 4 controller. So that's going to be over there. And that has those dual 40 gig USB out the back with display out. They should have display out. And then that's going to be 4 lanes to do that. And then you have 4 lanes to do an M.2 drive and 4 lanes to do another M.2 drive. So that's 4, 8, 12. So that's 12 out of the 20. And then this is what? M.2, M.2 underscore 2, and M2 underscore 3. Oh, of the... Okay. Yeah, I see. It literally says Gen 5 on M.2 underscore 1, but it doesn't say it on M.2 underscore 2. So that will never be able to do Gen 5, and it's not because of the motherboard. It's because the actual Hyper M.2 card doesn't support Gen 5 physically on the card itself. Okay, so that's 12 out of 20. So we still need lanes for the LAN. Does this have 10 gig LAN? I didn't look. I know it has 2.5. Where's the networking on here? Does it have it? Okay, it doesn't have 10 gig. It has 2.5 and 1, so it's okay. So it's like the Aorus Master. So that makes things easy, because you can technically run those off of Gen 3. You don't need Gen 4 to do all of that. So 4, 8, 12, and then if we say, well, let's start doing the 3.0. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So we have 6 out of 8. This is SATA. Hold on, where's that other diagram that you sent? Because I want to see, like, what do these guys do with the 3.0 bus? They put as media. Yeah, there was as media. Why'd they put so much as media on there, though? As media, it doesn't matter because all those USB ports don't really matter. Okay. So they have an as media. For some weird reason, I don't really know why they did it this way, which is kind of a strange choice. So where's the other SATA? Okay, well, that's how I was going to do it anyway. But anyway, what they can do with all these 8 lanes is this. So the first one is your 2.5 gigabit LAN. The second one is going to be Wi-Fi. We don't really need to put LAN there. I'll just say LAN. And then this guy's Wi-Fi 6. Then you have some SATA stuff. But what I think is kind of dumb about this motherboard is they went and they put as media splitters on here. Why? I have no idea. I think it's a dumb idea because you have so many lanes anyway on the Gen 3. But they went and put an as media, an ASM, I think 1061 or something. So that diagram that you sent me will have the number. As media, yep, I got it right, 1061. So they put a 1061 on there to, for some reason, to split 2 SATA ports. Why do they need to do this? I have no idea. Because by doing that, that kills the ability to do RAID of any sort on the E1 and E2 SATA ports. So no RAID at all on these 2 because they went and put a splitter on one of their PCI 3 lanes. I don't know why they did this. It just kind of seems ridiculous to do that because they had so many lanes. But they went and did it, so that's ASUS. So that, okay, and then over here we have SATA, what is this? SATA 1 through 4. That's like 4 lanes. So I know I drew 3, but then I guess we'll just draw another one. So basically you got 1, 2, 3, 4 SATA drives off the Gen 3 bus that all support, you know, RAID 0, 1, 5, 10, etc. So what is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 lanes, and then I guess, okay, I guess what they did, the 8th lane is gonna go to some USB hub. Some USB hub. Like, I don't know, like a 2.0 hub or something. Now, that diagram that you sent me, they probably know the as media. Yeah, so they're showing like an as media or something. Like, they have a bunch of as media stuff on there, which is probably what that is. But essentially, the last lane is going to some USB hub. It's some kind of as media controller. I don't know the model number, but it's kind of irrelevant because it's USB 2. So then now over here for 812, we still have 8 lanes. So I need to figure out what else. Okay, now they've given us 4 lanes of PCIe. This is that third, whatever the slot number was in the manual. But this is the one where you would plug it in, like the expander goes in there. Actually, is that an X8 slot? It supports X. It is a pre-bifurcated lane. That is interesting. That means that this has... That chipset thing at the bottom actually has 8 lanes. That's a lot of lanes. That's actually really nice. That's probably the saving grace of this motherboard. Because so far I'm not impressed with this motherboard. However, I do like this. Hyper M.2 is installed will run X8 only. I do like this third slot. It says it supports X4 and X4x4. That's so weird. So it's like it's always bifurcated. Which means you cannot do X8 in this slot. So it is a permanently bifurcated slot. And it cannot be unbifurcated, which means you cannot unify those lanes. So this can do X4 or X4 by 4 in this bottom. Actually, hold on. Let me go back. Let me redraw this. This is actually 8 lanes physically. They've taken 8 lanes, but the thing is, the slot will always only do X4 or X4 and X4, meaning you cannot do X8 electrically on this slot, which is kind of strange because it physically is taking 8 lanes. Because that gives us our full 20 lane count. 8 plus 4 plus 4 plus 4, that's 20 lanes. So that adds up. The math adds up, so it all checks out in terms of the lane allocation. However, you can't actually, like, the weird thing though is you can't really do like Crossfire or SLI. Well, SLI is completely out of the picture because ASUS didn't pay NVIDIA for the licensing keys to enable SLI on this board. So that doesn't even matter. But like, you can't do Crossfire if you were gonna try to like overclock whatever, like, or do some legacy benchmarks or whatever with multi-GPU. Well, multi-GPU would work. Like DX12 explicit multi-GPU would work on this board. But the thing is, like, if you plug in a graphics card down here, it's only going to run at X4. It's not going to run at X8. So that's kind of a bummer. But that's the thing. Like, this slot was literally designed for that expansion card. So I'm looking at your diagram that you sent over. The Hyper M.2, X4, and X8. Yeah, see? So I got it right. I try not to look at that too much. But this is what I came up with. The only thing that's not shown here, which is what is shown there, is all those USB stuff. But that's kind of irrelevant. So you just add those all to the chipset. So meaning all the USB stuff that goes on the back, all the USB is basically hanging off the chipset. So this is all your like USB, your USB hubs, the USB front panel headers, all the USB things. All the USB under the sun, the 3.2, 2x2, whatever, 2x1, etc. All those things, that's all going to be hanging off the chipset because unlike AMD, you don't plug USB ports into an Intel CPU. They have to go to the chipset. So that's going to be the ASUS Z790 Maximus Hero. Overall, I don't really like the motherboard. It doesn't have 10 gig LAN. It can't really do Gen 5 storage in a relatively simple way. I mean, you can do Gen 5, but, you know, it's going to take those lanes. I would have rather had another M.2 slot off the switch. What I would have ideally seen them do is give me a M.2 on the motherboard that wires to the switch and steals lanes so I don't have to plug the expander card in. I mean, that in my opinion, that's a more convenient way to do it, and that's what I see on like the Gigabyte Aorus Master, for example. So, comparing this to the Gigabyte Aorus Master, I like the Aorus Master better. And the Aorus Master also does have the 10 gigabit LAN, and this doesn't. So, the only thing that this does differently is it gives you the Thunderbolt controller included. But this is more expensive than the Gigabyte Master, so that's probably one of the reasons why. That, along with the inclusion of the expander card. Which really, I mean, the thing is, so if we count these, like, how many M.2s do we have? 1, 2, 3 physical on the board, and then 4 and 5. So this, with the expander card in the third slot, this motherboard only manages to match the Gigabyte Aorus Master Z790 in terms of how many M.2 drives you can connect. Because the Aorus Master physically has 5 M.2 drive slots on the motherboard, so you don't need to rely on the expander card. And one of them shares lanes with the GPU for Gen 5 storage. But, you know, like if you want to do Gen 5 on here, you'd have to peel lanes. Meaning, in my mind, I'm concluding that the Aorus Master is superior because you get 10 gig LAN, you get four physical M.2, there's one not shown here, but the Gigabyte one actually has a fourth one here. And then if you wanted the Gen 5, there is a fifth one that shares lanes with the graphics card. So, yeah, I think the Master's the better one. It's also cheaper. It's also like a $500 board as opposed to like a $600-something motherboard. The only trade-off is this. But, you know, the Master does come with a 10 gig LAN, which kind of makes this thing pointless. And if you really wanted Thunderbolt, you could just add the add-in card for like $60 or something off of Amazon. So I think the Master is the better motherboard. But this is not a terrible motherboard. It's just, I would rather have, you know, 4, 5 M.2 drives physically on the motherboard. I personally don't need the 10 gig LAN. I actually like the fact that the Hero includes the USB 4 on the back. I would actually use that compared to the 10 gig LAN, but you know, it depends on the use case. So, but that's kind of my takeaway from looking at this motherboard. It was interesting stuff though, because I've never actually looked at the Maximus Hero Z790 before. This was the first time I actually looked at it. So, I mean, it's a solid choice, although it's a little bit pricey. I'm trying to think how this compares to the ASUS Crosshair Hero, because that board is more expensive than this one. Oh, I think I know why. Yeah. So the reason why the Crosshair Hero, so the X670E, the AMD Hero motherboard, is going to cost $700 as opposed to this one at $630, is because that motherboard gives you the Gen 5 storage native. So that's the difference. The difference is the Crosshair also gives you this, but it gives you native Gen 5 storage. That's like the big difference, and that's why it's more expensive, because it natively has Gen 5, whereas this one doesn't actually really have Gen 5. It has it in a very, very roundabout, obfuscated way. For like one drive on that expander slot, or that Hyper M.2 card. So if I was going to choose between this and the Crosshair Hero, I would choose the Crosshair Hero, because I think it's like, what, $50 to $70 more? But you actually get like real Gen 5 storage without compromising on the graphics card, while still getting the USB 4 Thunderbolt 4. So you're not really trading anything. You're just paying a little bit more for the full Gen 5. That's basically what it is. The Z790 Ace. I think I talked about that one in a previous video. I think the only difference between that one and the... Because this one will have the block diagram, won't it? See if it's better. Well, it's not going to be better. It's not going to be better because it can't do the Gen 5. So feature-wise, it's not going to be able to match on that alone. Oh, you mean the... No, I think I talked about the Z790 Ace as well. I compared the two of them briefly in one of the live streams. But the main thing is the X670 one's still going to win because it's from a functionality standpoint, the Z790 is not going to be as good, mainly because of the whole thing with the Gen 5. Let me see, where is that? Assuming it's in here. Man, where is the... There it is. Okay, so we don't have to spend too much on this, but here we go. So again, there's the mux. So we have... Wait, why is it doing... They've drawn this in a really complicated way. But essentially, it's the same story, right? Like, as soon as you plug in an M.2 drive in this slot, it takes half the lane, so this drops to X8 for the graphics card. It's the same problem. The mux kind of ruins it. So this is a Gen 4, so this would be the boot drive. So this is exactly the same as the Aorus Master. Like, the Z790 Aorus Master does the exact same thing that the Ace does. And then you have that. Yeah, so 1, 2, 3, and then 4. So you get 4. So this is exactly like the Aorus Master. 2.5, Thunderbolt 4. Okay, so it's different. It's different in that it actually has Thunderbolt 4, whereas the X670E Aorus Master or the X670E Ace doesn't have Thunderbolt 4. But the thing is, what is the... Oh, okay. So the difference between the two of them is this one gives you Thunderbolt 4, and the Ace, the X670E Ace, gives you 4 lanes of Gen 5 on a PCIe slot, on a third PCIe slot. That's the difference. Whereas this just gives you Thunderbolt 4. Just like the Maximus and the Hero, or the Maximus Hero and the Crosshair Hero. And then 2.5, it gives you dual 2.5 gig LAN, where the X670E Ace gives you 10 gigabit LAN. So that's another thing that's different. It's kind of weird. Like, why are they doing dual 2.5? It's funny how none of these motherboards seem to be consistent. Like, they decide to change up the way they do things every single time. Yeah, Z790 doesn't have 10 gig. It has two 2.5 gig on the back. And then it has Thunderbolt 4, and then the same stuff. All this stuff is the same. Again, with the As Media, I don't know why, but they're doing As Media splitter, so you cannot do RAID on this on these two SATA drives because of that splitter. But then the other 4 or the other 3 plus this one, that's weird. Okay, I don't know why MSI did. Oh, MSI did that so that this M.2 can be SATA compatible. Yeah, I would rather have the 10 gig also. I agree with you there. Dual 2.5 seems kind of rather pointless. So yeah, strange choices, weird choices. I mean, the nice thing is it does have Thunderbolt 4. It does have Thunderbolt, so it's got Thunderbolt 4. They do weird things unnecessarily with like As Media stuff here. I don't know why. I don't think this is necessary. But anyway, they do that, and then you have like a display 10 gig. So they wire plus display. So they have the integrated graphics from Intel running through the chipset to a... I don't know why they do that, but I guess they... they have to do that. Do they have to do that? That's really strange. Okay, so... Yeah, oh, never mind. It goes through... Well, it's going through a mux, but there's also the connection to the chipset. That's a very strange USB port. It's always fascinating to look at how these guys have engineered these motherboards. Like, when I see how they've done things like this, I in my mind, I'm thinking, like, what made them decide to put dual 2.5 gig LAN on this one, but then put the 10 gig one on the AMD one? Like, I don't understand why. I guess it's because these are Intel network interface cards, and the 10 gig one on the AMD one is a Marvell. So maybe that's why. I don't know why they did that. Are some of the motherboard choices dictated by Intel? No, not necessarily. No, it's totally up to the motherboard manufacturer to pick and choose what they want to put on there. It's their own design. Intel has nothing to do with it. Intel probably has a reference design, but Intel stopped doing that 10 years ago. In fact, the very last Intel reference motherboard, you used to be able to buy Intel branded motherboards. They would literally have Intel on the box. The very last one, and I really, to this day, I wish I would have purchased one from Micro Center back in 2013. It was the Z87. So it was for the Haswell 4th gen. So think i7 4770K. I really wish I would have chosen that motherboard over the MSI Z7 or the Z87 that I ended up getting instead. But that was the very last Intel desktop motherboard. Reference motherboard. So Intel doesn't make reference motherboards anymore. So they probably have like a block diagram reference that they provide to the motherboard manufacturers, but the motherboard manufacturers can choose whatever they want to put on the motherboard. So it'll be interesting to figure out what they actually do or understand like why they choose to do the things they do. There must be a lot of market research, I'm sure. But it's all fascinating stuff. So yeah, this one, I don't think it's really that great. The only thing nice about it is the Thunderbolt 4, realistically. I mean, that's convenient. It doesn't have... Where's the PCIe lanes? Or where's the X4? I don't see an X4 on here. Do they not have an X4? Is this... Wait a minute. No, there's a third slot. Where is it? I don't see the third slot listed on here. Am I missing something? 1, 2? Where's the third one? Did they completely forget to include that on their block diagram? Okay, I think MSI completely forgot to include where their bottom slot plugs in. So we're going to have to go and look now at the... Well, at least the block diagram doesn't show it. So that means we're going to have to go look for it on here. From chipset. PCIe E3 is from chipset. So, but they forgot to draw it on their block diagram. So that's a big oops. Oops. On MSI's part, they failed to include that on their block diagram. From what I could tell, I really don't see it on there anywhere. But that's gonna be that. Right? Like I don't see nowhere down here does it say PCI 4.0 anywhere. So they forgot to draw that on their motherboard, the block diagram. So anyway, that's the Ace. I know I talked about it before briefly in comparison to the X670E Ace. It's good. It doesn't have 10 gig LAN, but it does have Thunderbolt. That's like the key takeaway. But it is more convenient than the Maximus Hero, because the thing is, this, unlike the Hero, this guy actually has 4 physical M.2 drive slots, 2 of which are backwards compatible with SATA on the motherboard itself. So you get 1 of the CPU, and you get 3 to the chipset. This is exactly the same layout as the Gigabyte Aorus Master. And then you have a fifth one for Gen 5 if you wanted to steal lanes from the graphics card. And that gets disabled when using the second slot. Okay, so that's going to be the Z790 Ace. Let's see. I guess that's it. I guess if anybody has any more questions, or if we want to go over any more motherboards, we can. Otherwise, I think that's going to be it for this stream. I didn't really have too much other things planned, except I was talking about earlier about the upcoming like video review that I'm going to have for the X3D CPU. Have I done Tai Chi before? Yeah, I've covered it before. That's actually a really good one. The only thing about it is it doesn't have the bottom slot down here because ASRock gives you the Thunderbolt controller instead of the 4 lanes, so which is a strange choice because they could have wired it up differently like the way ASUS did it. But yeah, I've talked about Tai Chi before. Joey with the $10 super chat. Much appreciated for that. With the fancy, it's funny like when that's gonna show up pretty soon on stream. But it's funny how it'll transcribe that image into a description, and it's always funny to see what it actually does when that shows up. You're loving the Ace. You had it running all day. Oh, the X670 one. The X670 one's really good. Yeah, that one's like probably one of the best motherboards on the market right now. It's expensive, but it's really good. Oh, it didn't do the thing. It said you wanted $10, but it didn't translate the image that you put in there. That's weird because I've seen it do that before. It'll like describe the image. It's like an AI will describe the image that it sees. I guess it doesn't know what that is with all those sunglasses. But yeah, that's a good one. It's a great motherboard. I mean, like Joey and I have kind of talked about it back and forth. Like literally, if you use your computer for work, for productivity, the Ace is an excellent choice. We are kind of dependent on BIOS updates for things to improve, but in general, though, for daily use, you can't really go wrong with the Ace. Like in my mind, there's probably only, well, I mean, even the ASUS Crosshair Extreme at $1,000, it doesn't really give you anything more than what you get with the Ace. So it's like, once you hit that top price point around like $700-800, like any motherboard that's priced above that doesn't really indicate good value, because at that point you're just throwing money away for things like ASUS branding and that kind of thing. And like the Godlike from MSI, because I know they also make the Meg Godlike. That's like $1,300, and that literally doesn't even do anything, from what I can tell, better than the Ace. Like I don't know what that motherboard has. Like I think at one point, X670E Godlike, I think it has SLI. I remember the initial info on the Godlike was that it had SLI support. But see, then they took it away. They took it away. I remember when this motherboard was first announced by MSI, like on the product page, it literally said multi-GPU, AMD, Crossfire, and NVIDIA SLI. So in my mind, I thought, okay, the NVIDIA tax has gotten so bad that if you want SLI for your old school 1080 Ti's, or 2080 Ti or whatever, you would have to pay $1,300 for a motherboard in 2022 to get access to SLI, because there's no other motherboard that supports SLI out of the new ones. So, but the thing is, this doesn't even list SLI anymore. So I don't know what this motherboard has, because that justifies the $1,300 asking price. Because honestly, the one thing that I could find was SLI. And now that's been removed, at least from their product page. So I don't know if it will actually work with SLI. But I know for a fact, and I knew I should have taken a screenshot of that product page for when it actually showed SLI support. Back in September, when this was announced at launch, it said SLI, and then now it's gone. So it's like, well, now this thing really doesn't have any purpose to exist anymore. You like the Ace a lot, but went Tai Chi because it does virtualization BIOS stuff. I think Ace does too. So, like, if you're talking SRIOV, I think the options for the Ace are there. But I personally can't confirm that because I don't actually have the motherboard. So, I can't check on that myself personally, but I would assume that SRIOV support and those sort of things for pass-through for the VM, I think it's there. But someone else would have to confirm. Like, I can't say absolute yes it does or no it doesn't. The Tai Chi's good, though. The Tai Chi is, like, a really good one. The Thunderbolt is there. It's full Thunderbolt, full PCIe pass-through, full PCIe tunneling. The IOMMU, yeah. I'd be surprised if Ace doesn't have the SRIOV setting in the BIOS. Or ACS. I think it's there. You would look under Advanced. You'd look under Advanced. It would not be under the tweaker menu. It's going to be under Advanced. Maybe under the CPU. Additional CPU settings. Or Advanced CPU features. Advanced CPU settings. I'm just trying to name, like, off the top of my head, what it would be labeled in an MSI motherboard. I think it's going to be Advanced CPU features or something. Wherever you enable SVM is probably where the SRIOV stuff would be. And you can switch between integrated GPU or graphics card. Oh, in the BIOS? When you say switch between them, what do you mean? Do you mean if you plug in the monitor to the motherboard, it can actually run to the discrete card? In the BIOS? Well, I know in the BIOS you can enable or disable the integrated graphics. You can do that on the Gigabyte. Like on the Aorus Master that I have, it has the choice to say always prefer integrated, disable integrated, or auto, or enable. I guess. Well, I guess for this one. Hold on, would it be in the manual? Well, I don't see it listed in this manual, so I don't know. I'm pretty sure SRIOV and all those things are on the Ace as well. I know the Gigabyte Aorus Master has the option for IOMMU. It's in the Gigabyte Aorus Master. I would assume it's in all of them. All the $500-ish motherboards should all have that functionality. Yeah. Yeah, that's the thing. Like, the documentation in the last couple of generations hasn't been very good. I remember when I got Alder Lake back in 2021, it was a real pain to find things for SRIOV and that kind of stuff. I mean, it was there, but it's like you couldn't figure out like what were the IOMMU mappings and that sort of stuff. Like, none of that was documented, or it was very, very poorly documented, at least from Gigabyte. Yeah, so for virtualization, every one of those motherboards, I believe under advanced CPU features, I think the name of it would be something like that. There should be an option for SRIOV and IOMMU, but the IOMMU, I'm not sure where that would show up on MSI. That might actually be under a submenu. Now, the other thing is the SVM. So SVM is going to be definitely under advanced CPU features. I think SRIOV is in the same area. And for those wondering, I think the resizable bar options are also going to be around where this menu is. So I guess to answer like Joey's question earlier about asking where you would find these settings, in the BIOS for the Ace, go and look where you enable resizable bar. So the above 4G decoding and the rebar feature, I think SVM is somewhere near there, and then SRIOV should be nearby as well. The only one that I'm not sure is the IOMMU. I don't know where that's at. That's either going to be under advanced CPU, or it's going to be buried under some AMD, common BIOS setting somewhere. I don't know. PCIe Access Control Service is under advanced. AMD CBS. Yeah, AMD CBS stands for Common BIOS Settings, for those wondering. So the thing is, when you see the AMD menus, so when you see stuff like AMD CBS, and then in there you'll see stuff like the NBIO, SMU, the DDR stuff, or I guess it would be the UMC. In no particular order. I don't remember the order, but like all these things are together in the submenu. All of these are under something known as the AGISA library, firmware library. So whenever AMD releases an AGISA update, all of the stuff in here gets changed to whatever that latest revision is. All the other things that are like not in this sub menu are based off of the motherboard manufacturer's updates themselves. So whatever they decide to fix. Like, for example, if there's a BIOS bug that is not under one of those categories for the AMD common BIOS settings, the fix is going to have to come from the motherboard manufacturer. Anything else, so like, for example, memory compatibility, how fast you can run the memory at a stable speed, whether or not like the sleep functionality will work, that has to come from the AGISA updates, from what I can tell. Like, motherboard manufacturers, all they can do is they can turn on like S3 so that it's visible to the OS. However, if it doesn't work correctly, there isn't really a whole lot the motherboard manufacturer can do to remedy that. Like, that the actual fix has to come from AMD. So this has been kind of a double-edged sword for the AMD platform in general, because AGISA is kind of a black box solution. Rarely do the motherboard manufacturers have full access control to those knobs. That's really held by AMD. So it's kind of like NVIDIA's, like the SLI keys and that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's kind of locked down. So that's pretty much the extent of what I know on how a GISA is different from, all the other BIOS settings that are hidden away in there, or kind of not hidden away. Like the PBO, the curve optimizer, all the stuff in the overclocking menu, that's not really a GISA, but like the algorithms, the boost algorithms, I don't know how much of that is controlled by a GISA, or how much of it is literally just responding to inputs from the motherboard firmware. And, GISA doesn't really have anything to do with that. So, I don't know. I could be wrong there. I don't really know too much about how the firmware... I just know a GISA is a black box. A company like ASUS or MSI, they typically don't have full access to knowing what exactly is in there. There's typically a bunch of firmware libraries, and that's where your AMD Common BIOS settings exist. So stuff like the IO-MMU mappings, for example, I don't know... I don't think things like IO-MMU port mappings have anything to do with a GISA. I think that's going to be more so on the motherboard manufacturer and how they decide to implement that in the firmware. The GISA is going to be more like, here's what you can and can't do. Here are the knobs for controlling things like curve optimizer. These are the voltage inputs that you can specify. And like, if, for instance, if you tell me to run my RAM at 1.35 volts, I'll accept that, or whatever. Like that kind of stuff. Like the voltage ranges are typically managed at the absolute maximum limits by the GISA, but the motherboard manufacturer, I think they can override that stuff. But I don't know what exactly they can and cannot override. So I know that was a whole bunch of like all over the place BIOS jargon, but that's basically what I understand on how a GISA is different from the rest of the firmware on the motherboard, the rest of the UEFI. Everybody calls it BIOS, but technically it's UEFI. BIOS is like super old, but anyway, you guys get the idea. So I guess that's pretty much it. I mean, this stream was fairly short compared to my other ones. But I think most of the people watching that stuck around got a lot of value out of it. So I think it was good. I think I'm not going to stream Wolong Fallen Dynasty tonight. I think I'll just probably end the stream here. So tomorrow I'm going to post the review for the X3D CPU. So expect to see a video live on the channel. Not live on the channel, but, go upload on the channel for the 7950X3D. So in that video, we are going to be comparing it in gaming only. So no productivity, all just gaming. And it will be compared with the standard 7950X, as well as the Intel i9 13900K. So the standard one is going to be on there as well. And I think the results are going to be very interesting. I don't know. I think it might make Reddit explode or something. Am I streaming tomorrow? Probably not. Probably not. We'll see. I typically do one of the two weekend nights, and then I usually do Thursday evening. I'm starting to standardize my stream schedule to Thursday evening and maybe Saturday or Friday. In this case, I did both. But typically, don't expect me to stream on Sunday night, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, unless there is some, you know, serious product launch coming out, or there's some game. So like in the case of next week, I will most likely be streaming on, let me check the schedule, March 8th. So March 8th, that evening, which is Wednesday evening, there will probably be a stream unless I'm like super busy and I can't do it. So that's the thing. But yeah, I expect to stream Thursday evenings. So, yeah, and we're going to be streaming Fatal Frame Mask of the Lunar Eclipse. So that will be different from Wolong, because I think that from what I gathered from the previous stream, a lot of people didn't care to watch me play Wolong Fallen Dynasty. So I am still going to try to stream that game at least one more time before Fatal Frame releases. But I kind of think that the Fatal Frame stream, at least I'm anticipating, is going to have a lot more user interaction, or viewer interaction, I should say, because that's going to be a really scary game, and I think it'll be an entertaining one, to put it one way or the other. But yeah, I don't think I'll be live tomorrow. I might be. It depends on if I am available. Like if I don't have anything going on tomorrow evening, I'll probably do like a short stream, kind of like this one. But yeah, if I do stream tomorrow, it'll be very much like the previous stream. So it's not going to be like a technical thing. It's going to be basically me just playing Wolong Fallen Dynasty again. And if anybody asks a question, I mean, I can always like pause the game or take a break from the game and address that, you know, using my classic format of paint and drawing things. Because that seems to be the method of choice nowadays, with at least with my live streams. So anyway, guys, with that said, I'm going to go ahead and get on out of here. Thanks again for everybody for watching and tuning in. It does help me actually stay motivated to keep on doing this. And I appreciate the super chat, Joey, as always. And once again, guys, thanks again, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.